Have you ever noticed how some people seem to carry an unshakable confidence that makes others feel simultaneously drawn to them and threatened by them? They don't apologize for who they are. They don't hide their flaws or pretend to be perfect. They simply exist, fully and unapologetically, in their own skin. And somehow, this terrifies everyone around them, while simultaneously making them magnetic. Now imagine if you did the same. If you stopped running from the parts of yourself you've been taught to hate, if you embrace the totality of who you are, shadows and light alike. That's where true power lies. When you finally accept yourself completely, the world around you goes into crisis because people are used to controlling you through your shame, through your insecurities, through your desperate need for their approval. But the day you choose to embrace every part of yourself, even the parts you've been conditioned to reject, the game changes entirely. And those who thought they knew how to manipulate your self-doubt realize they have absolutely no power over you anymore. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Now think about this. When you stop seeking external validation, who really gets desperate? Who becomes uncomfortable? Who tries to shame you back into conformity just to regain control over your energy? This reveals more about them than about you. And it mainly reveals how much your self-rejection has been serving their psychological needs. You keep betraying yourself to fit in, to be loved, to avoid the terror of standing alone in your truth. And with every self-abandoning yes, every mask you wear, every authentic impulse you suppress, you give away a piece of your soul. And at the end of the day, what's left? A hollow version of yourself that everyone loves, but no one truly knows. But I'll tell you why this happens. Because you are too afraid of your own wholeness, too terrified of the power that comes from complete self-acceptance. This video is not about becoming narcissistic or delusional about your flaws. It's about choosing psychological integration. It's about learning what Jung called individuation, the courageous journey of becoming whole, authentic, undivided. So I ask you now, looking into your eyes, how long will you continue to be controlled by your own self-hatred? How long will you reject parts of yourself just to earn love that disappears the moment you show who you really are? Maybe it's time to face the terror, to embrace the totality, to become frighteningly authentic. Because when you stop running from yourself, everything changes. You have been taught to accept others unconditionally while rejecting yourself mercilessly. Since childhood, you have been conditioned to believe that self-acceptance is selfish, that acknowledging your worth is arrogance, that embracing your flaws is giving up on improvement. But here's a truth that perhaps no one has told you with this clarity. This selective self-rejection is not humility. It is psychological violence against your own soul. And as long as you continue to think that you need to earn your own acceptance through perfection, achievement, or others' approval, you will be trapped in an endless cycle of self-betrayal, constantly shape-shifting to match what you think the world wants from you. Do you know why self-acceptance feels so terrifying? Because it means taking full responsibility for who you are. Not just the polished, socially acceptable parts, but the messy, complicated, contradictory totality of your humanity. It means owning your shadows, your mistakes, your imperfections, and saying, "This is me," without apologizing or explaining or trying to fix yourself into acceptability. But you don't do this because you are trapped in what Jung called the persona, this idealized mask we create to be loved, approved, validated by others. And it is exactly this mask that keeps you in perpetual self-rejection. You say you're fine when you're struggling. You hide your authentic emotions to maintain others' comfort. You apologize for taking up space, for having needs, for being human. But the truth is, that the more you reject parts of yourself to gain acceptance from others, the more you disappear from your own life. Self-rejection is a form of internal exile. It is a way of abandoning yourself to avoid the imagined catastrophe of being abandoned by others. People who demand that you reject parts of yourself to earn their love don't actually love you. They love their projection of who they think you should be. They love the version of you that makes them comfortable, that doesn't challenge their worldview, that doesn't trigger their own unhealed wounds. But this isn't love. This is conditional tolerance. And here's what's cruel about this dynamic. The more you reject yourself, the less others respect you. Because what you don't value in yourself, no one else will value either. Your self-hatred becomes a permission slip for others to treat you poorly. Your internal criticism becomes their external criticism. You teach people how to see you by how you see yourself. Carl Jung understood that the psyche cannot tolerate division indefinitely. What you reject in yourself doesn't disappear. It goes underground, into what he called the shadow. And from there, it runs your life unconsciously. The anger you won't acknowledge leaks out as passive aggression. The sadness you won't feel becomes chronic numbness. The power you won't own becomes manipulation or victimhood. But here's what most people don't realize. Self-acceptance isn't about becoming complacent or stopping growth. It's about creating a foundation of inner stability from which real transformation becomes possible. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot integrate what you continue to reject. You cannot become whole while at war with parts of yourself. So now, stop and think. What parts of yourself have you been rejecting? What aspects of your personality do you apologize for? What emotions do you shame yourself for feeling? What desires do you judge as wrong or selfish? These rejected parts aren't your enemies. They are the keys to your psychological freedom. But before we can understand how to reclaim these lost parts of ourselves, we need to explore why self-rejection feels so familiar, so automatic, so necessary. The answer lies in what Jung called psychological wounding, the early experiences that taught us our wholeness was unacceptable. And that is what we will talk about next. Because your relationship with yourself determines every other relationship in your life. And if you don't learn to face your own reflection with compassion, you will spend your entire life running from mirrors. If this content is resonating with your journey towards self-acceptance, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. PSYphile. Carl Jung didn't see self-rejection as a moral failing or a lack of willpower. For him, it was a survival strategy learned in childhood, a way of protecting ourselves from abandonment, criticism, or rejection by becoming what we thought others needed us to be. But what begins as protection becomes a prison, and the warden of this prison is your own internalized shame. Every time you reject a part of yourself, you are making an unconscious decision. That love is more important than authenticity, that acceptance is more valuable than integrity, that belonging matters more than wholeness. And Jung was clear about the cost of this choice: psychological fragmentation. You develop what he called a split personality, not in the clinical sense, but in the sense that you begin living as multiple, disconnected versions of yourself. There's the version you show your family, the version you present at work, the version you become in romantic relationships, the version you hide even from yourself. And none of these versions is complete. Each one represents a fragment of your true self, carefully curated to avoid rejection. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The more you fragment yourself, the more you attract people who benefit from your self-rejection. Manipulative people have a sixth sense for self-hatred. They can smell it on you. They know that someone who doesn't accept themselves will tolerate being treated poorly, will make excuses for others' bad behavior, will apologize for their own existence. Do you know what happens to someone who lives in constant self-rejection? They become hypervigilant about others' moods, constantly scanning for signs of disapproval, walking on eggshells in their own life. They become people-pleasers, chameleons, emotional contortionists, anything to avoid the terror of being seen and rejected for who they really are. Jung said that what we resist persists. The more you fight against your own nature, the more it controls you from the shadows. The anger you won't own becomes explosive rage at unexpected moments. The sadness you won't feel becomes chronic depression. The power you won't claim becomes unconscious manipulation. The sexuality you shame becomes either repression or compulsion. Your rejected parts don't disappear. They go underground and run your life from there. This is what Jung called being lived by your unconscious. You think you're making conscious choices, but really, you're being controlled by the parts of yourself you refuse to face. And here's the cruelest irony. The very parts of yourself you reject to gain love are often the parts that would make you most lovable if you could embrace them. Your sensitivity, your intensity, your depth, your complexity, your imperfections, these aren't bugs in your system. They're features. They're what make you human, relatable, real. But self-acceptance feels terrifying because it means facing the ultimate truth. You are responsible for your own emotional well-being. You cannot wait for others to give you permission to exist fully. You cannot earn your way into self-worth through achievement or approval. You cannot love yourself conditionally and expect it to feel like love. The fear of self-acceptance is really the fear of psychological independence, because once you accept yourself completely, you no longer need others' validation to feel okay about who you are. You no longer need to perform for love. You no longer need to betray yourself to belong. And this threatens every relationship built on your self-rejection. Jung spoke about what he called the treasure hard to attain, the integrated self that emerges when we stop running from our own shadows and start embracing our full humanity. But this treasure comes with a price. You will lose people who only loved the mask. You will outgrow environments that required your self-rejection. You will become incomprehensible to those who needed your shame to feel superior. The most profound rejection you will face on the journey to self-acceptance won't come from others. It will come from the parts of yourself that have been trained to believe wholeness is dangerous. Your own psyche will resist integration because fragmentation feels safer, more familiar, more controllable. But here's what Jung knew that changes everything. Self-acceptance is not a destination. It's a practice. It's not about reaching a state of perfect self-love where you never doubt yourself again. It's about developing the courage to meet yourself with compassion, especially in the moments when you feel most unlovable. It's about learning to hold space for your contradictions without trying to resolve them into a more acceptable simplicity. It's about recognizing that your flaws and your gifts are not separate. They are different faces of the same wholeness. It's about understanding that the very wounds that have taught you to reject yourself can become the sources of your greatest strength and deepest wisdom. But how do you begin this terrifying journey? How do you start accepting parts of yourself you've spent years, maybe decades, rejecting? How do you develop the courage to be authentic in a world that profits from your self-hatred? And what do you do when self-acceptance feels like the loneliest path you could choose? In the next part, we will explore the practical psychology of self-acceptance, not as a spiritual platitude, but as a radical act of psychological rebellion against every force that has taught you to be at war with yourself. Because until you make peace with your own reflection, you will be fighting a battle that cannot be won. Get ready to discover why loving yourself completely is the most revolutionary thing you can do in a world that needs you small, ashamed, and endlessly seeking external approval. It's no use understanding self-acceptance intellectually if in practice you continue criticizing yourself mercilessly. apologizing for your existence, and shape-shifting to match others' expectations of who you should be. Awareness without embodiment is just another form of psychological bypass. True self-acceptance begins when you make the radical decision to treat yourself like someone you actually care about. And this requires what Jung called active imagination, the conscious choice to dialogue with the rejected parts of yourself rather than continuing to exile them. Conscious self-acceptance is not about becoming delusionally positive about your flaws or pretending you're perfect. It's about developing an integrated relationship with all aspects of your humanity, the beautiful and the ugly, the light and the shadow, the acceptable and the shameful. This starts with small acts of internal rebellion, catching yourself mid-self-criticism and asking, would I speak to a friend this way? Noticing when you apologize for taking up space and choosing not to. Recognizing when you're performing a version of yourself for others' comfort, and gently returning to authenticity. Setting boundaries without feeling guilty. Expressing your truth even when it makes others uncomfortable. But here's the most important part. You don't need to justify your existence to anyone, including yourself. You don't need to earn the right to take up space. You don't owe the world a perfect version of yourself. Your worth is not contingent on your productivity, your achievements, your likability, or your ability to make others comfortable. Your worth is inherent. It came with your birth certificate. Carl Jung understood that every process of individuation requires what he called holding the tension of opposites, learning to be simultaneously confident and humble, strong and vulnerable, independent and connected, accepting and growing. This isn't about resolving these paradoxes into something simpler. It's about developing the psychological capacity to hold complexity without collapsing into either-or thinking. Want to know a reliable indicator of your growth towards self-acceptance? Notice who becomes uncomfortable when you stop apologizing for who you are. Notice who tries to shame you back into self-rejection when you start embracing your authenticity. Notice who accuses you of being too much when you stop making yourself smaller. These reactions aren't signs that you're doing something wrong. They're proof that you're doing something right. Self-acceptance disrupts every relationship built on your self-hatred. The friend who felt superior because you were always criticizing yourself. The partner who felt in control because you were always seeking their approval. The family member who felt comfortable because you were always the problem they could focus on instead of looking at themselves. When you start loving yourself, you remove yourself as a target for their projections. But let's address the elephant in the room. Self-acceptance feels selfish in a culture that profits from your insecurity. You've been conditioned to believe that self-criticism is motivating, that shame drives improvement, that you need to hate parts of yourself to change them. But psychological research shows the opposite is true. Self-compassion, not self-criticism, is what creates sustainable transformation. When you accept yourself completely, you create psychological safety within your own mind. And from this foundation of inner security, you can take risks, try new things, fail gracefully, and grow authentically. But when you're at war with yourself, all your energy goes into internal conflict, leaving nothing left for actual growth or creativity or connection. Jung spoke about what he called the transcendent function, the psychological capacity to hold opposing elements in consciousness until a new, more integrated perspective emerges. Applied to self-acceptance, this means learning to hold both your current self and your potential self without rejecting either one. You can accept who you are right now while also growing into who you're becoming. These aren't contradictory, they're complementary. Here's what practicing self-acceptance actually looks like. It's forgiving yourself for the mistakes you made when you didn't know better. It's acknowledging your shadows without being consumed by shame. It's celebrating your growth without dismissing where you started. It's setting boundaries based on self-respect rather than people-pleasing. It's choosing relationships that honor your authenticity rather than reward your performance. It's learning to comfort yourself the way you would comfort a child, with patience, gentleness, and unconditional positive regard. It's recognizing that your internal dialogue becomes your external reality, so you consciously choose thoughts that support your well-being rather than sabotage it. It's understanding that self-love is not a feeling you wait to receive. It's a practice you commit to regardless of how you feel. But self-acceptance will cost you. It will cost you relationships built on your self-rejection. It will cost you the familiar comfort of victimhood. It will cost you the secondary benefits of being the broken one, the struggling one, the one who always needs saving. It will cost you the illusion that you can control others' opinions of you by controlling which parts of yourself you show. And it will give you something far more valuable in return: psychological sovereignty. The knowledge that you can face your own reflection without flinching. The confidence that comes from knowing you've examined yourself honestly and chosen to stay. The peace that emerges when you stop fighting a civil war in your own mind. Jung said that individuation, becoming who you really are, requires the courage to disappoint others' expectations of you. Self-acceptance is the foundation of this courage. Because when you accept yourself completely, you no longer need others' acceptance to feel whole. You no longer need to betray yourself to belong. You no longer need to perform for love. The most profound shift happens when you realize that self-acceptance isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It's about recognizing that you were never broken to begin with. You were just taught to see yourself through the lens of others' projections, others' wounds, others' limitations. The journey isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to be ashamed. But what happens after you make this shift? What changes in your life when you finally embrace your full humanity? What becomes possible when you stop running from your own reflection? In the final part, we will explore the profound transformation that occurs when self-acceptance becomes not just an idea you intellectually understand, but a lived reality that changes how you move through the world. Because the courage to love yourself completely doesn't just change you, it changes everyone around you. Get ready to understand why self-acceptance is the most powerful gift you can give to a world desperate for authentic connection. When you finally accept yourself completely, something profound begins to happen. First comes the silence, an unfamiliar peace that settles in the spaces where self-criticism used to live. You wonder if this wholeness is real, if you're allowed to feel this integrated, if you're somehow cheating by not hating parts of yourself. But gradually, this peace deepens. It begins to radiate outward, affecting every relationship, every decision, every moment of your life. And then comes the clarity. Not the clarity of having all the answers, but the clarity of no longer being at war with the question of your own worth. You stop asking, am I enough? And start asking, what do I want to create? You stop wondering if you deserve love and start choosing relationships that actually feel loving. You stop apologizing for existing and start celebrating the unique contribution only you can make to the world. The people who feel uncomfortable with your self-acceptance reveal something crucial. They needed your self-hatred to feel better about themselves. They needed you to be broken so they could feel fixed. They needed you to be small so they could feel big. And now that you refuse to play that role, they don't know what to do with you. And that is profoundly liberating. Carl Jung said that the goal of individuation is not to become perfect, but to become whole. When you accept yourself completely, you stop trying to be someone else's version of perfect and start being your own version of authentic. You cease to be controlled by shame and start being guided by values. You stop shape-shifting to fit in and start creating spaces where you belong exactly as you are. You will lose people on this journey, but you will find yourself. You will outgrow environments that required your self-rejection, but you will discover communities that celebrate your authenticity. You will become incomprehensible to those who knew only your masks. But finally, you will begin to be truly seen and loved for who you actually are. Because when you are no longer available for relationships that require your self-abandonment, you become magnetic to connections that honor your wholeness. When you stop performing for approval, you attract people who appreciate your authenticity. When you embrace your shadows, as well as your light, you give others permission to be human too. And don't be fooled. This is a rebirth, a fundamental reorganization of how you exist in the world. You are no longer available for emotional crumbs disguised as love. You are no longer willing to betray yourself for belonging. You are no longer afraid of being alone, because you've learned to be at home with yourself. Now you only accept relationships that enhance your peace rather than disturb it, connections that celebrate your growth rather than punish it, love that includes your humanity rather than demanding its perfection. And if you have made it this far, it's because a part of you is ready for this transformation. A part of you has already understood that being loved for a false version of yourself is not actually being loved at all. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to face the terror and embrace the power of complete self-acceptance? Are you willing to love yourself so fully that it changes everything? If this message reached the part of you that's been waiting for permission to exist fully, write in the comments, I choose wholeness. Let's see how many here are ready for this ultimate act of courage. If these words sparked a moment of calm or clarity for you, please hit the like button to share this wisdom with others searching for peace. Subscribe to become a part of our PSYphile community, where we explore life-changing ideas every week. And let's keep the conversation going. Which quote spoke to your heart today? Drop it in the comments below. I can't wait to read your thoughts. As you move forward, let these ideas be a gentle guide, reminding you that peace and purpose are always within reach. Until we meet again in our next exploration of the mind and soul, stay kind to yourself. Embrace each moment with hope, and may your journey be filled with light and understanding. Take care and don't forget, keep watching our next video where we explore the shadow work that makes true self-acceptance possible. It's more important than you'd imagine. See you there.